Captain America is one of the most well-established characters in the Marvel Universe, but for the folks who know him best thanks to his appearances in the MCU, there's a lot of confusion surrounding the character. Chris Evans' performance has helped to define the MCU, but like all films, it's not a perfect representation of the comic book character. That makes a lot of sense, actually, seeing as Captain America has been appearing in comic books since 1941. There are literally thousands of comics relating to Captain America, which means a few movie appearances will never come close to approximating his entire history. Sure, we might all be capable of reciting the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Man, but here's my plan to right those wrongs. I'm Ewan from What Culture, and there are 10 things everyone always gets wrong about Captain America. Number 10, Howard Stark created Cap's shield. It's pretty clear where Steve Rogers got his iconic shield in the movies. Howard Stark cobbled together all the vibranium known to exist in the world and fashioned it into a shield for the first Avenger, but that's not how it went down in the comics. When Cap got his vibranium shield in the comics, it was a much bigger deal than what was shown on the silver screen. Instead of someone just handing it to him as part of his accession to become the first super soldier, he had to go on some adventures first. With his sidekick, Bucky Barnes, Captain America traveled around the globe for some time before he received his shield, but it wasn't from some scientist, it was from the President of the United States himself. That's right, Franklin Delano Roosevelt presented Captain America with his iconic shield back in the day. To be clear, he used a different shield up until that point, but it wasn't a disc-shaped shield that it wasn't made of vibranium. This shield was given to Cap in Captain America number 255 by FDR, and it has remained pretty much the same ever since. Number 9, he's always been referred to as Captain America. While Captain America was still being designed, there was another name the writers and artists were kicking around for the man who would go on to represent the United States during World War II. The name was Super American. When you think about it, Super American isn't necessarily a bad name for who and what Cap is, but it doesn't have the same panache as Captain America. That name denotes both rank in the military and a patriotic origin, whereas Super American sounds, Number 8, his role in Civil War. Captain America Civil War was only a single movie, but it was based on a year-long event that flipped the entirety of the Marvel Universe on its head. In the movie, the response to the Ultron event led to an international agreement called the Sokovia Accords, but that's not how it went down in the comics. Instead of Ultron and Sokovia, the government reacted to Nitro's explosion in a small town that killed 600 civilians. That event led to the Superhero Registration Act, which, like the Sokovia Accords, split the superhero community right down the middle. The movie only managed to have one big battle between the two sides, as well as a final confrontation between Cap, Iron Man, and the Winter Soldier. In the comics, however, there were dozens of battles spanning the entirety of the event. Cap went full rogue and led his band of anti-registration heroes much like a guerrilla force. Needless to say, the film did it much better. Number 7, he's always been a military man. It's easy to look at a character like Captain America and think of him as being 100% gung-ho about the military, but he actually has a lot of outside interests. The movies didn't do much to push along the fact that Captain America is a pretty decent artist, at least in the comics. He's all about soldiering on screen, but in the comics, Steve Rogers was once a fine art student. He spent his time working on writing and illustrating comics. That was all the way back in the 1930s and 1940s, which may be the reason he didn't continue down that path. There was a little something called World War II going on across the planet, and as Steve once said, he doesn't like bullies. He put his pencils down and decided he would spend every moment of his life working to get himself into the United States military, no matter the cost. Number 6, Steve Rogers is the only Captain America. Steve Rogers is the man everybody knows of as Captain America, but he hasn't been the only one to take that name throughout the years. He was certainly the first though, and soon after he ingested the Super Soldier Serum, he was given the name as the future leader of a corps of similarly enhanced troops. Unfortunately, that never happened as the project was sabotaged and the Super Soldier Serum's formula was forever lost. Just because the army wasn't able to make any more super soldiers though, doesn't mean there haven't been people who would take up the mantle when Rogers couldn't. Since Cap has lost his powers a few times, died, and otherwise been out of the picture for a variety of reasons, several folks have stepped up to call themselves Captain America in his absence. The most notable ones are probably Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, but there were several others. In addition to those two, the likes of Danielle Cage, John Walker, Isaiah Bradley, Jeffrey Mace, and even Scott Summers, otherwise known as the Mutant Cyclops, have taken up Cap's shield and identity. Number 5, his patriotism. Steve Rogers is a patriot in the truest sense, but here's the thing about patriotism. It doesn't mean you're beholden to every government that comes in. There seems to be a perception that Captain America has always been there for America for non-partisan benefit, but to believe that would just be incorrect. The character literally took on the Nixon presidency in the original Secret Empire during the 70s. Civil War needs no introduction, and his first priority has always been to fight against tyranny, no matter its source, even if it comes from within. Number 4, he didn't need to train. If everything you know of Captain America comes from the MCU, you'd probably have a different understanding of how he became a superhero. He went to a specialized form of basic combat training and did what soldiers do, but he never really completed any formal training before undergoing his transformation. That's not how it went down in the comics. Like everyone in uniform, he still required a great deal of training. The serum gave him physical perfection, but it didn't implant within his mind the best military tactics and training necessary to take on the Third Reich. Since the day he got the serum, Rogers has been in a never-ending cycle of training and physical exercise. They did show him working out in the movies by destroying a few heavy bags and ripping some logs apart, but it's been far more extensive in the books. He maintains a strict workout regimen and has since studied up on history's greatest military leaders and combat engagements, but has also studied and become an expert in various forms of martial arts and boxing. Number 3, he has superpowers. One of the most common misconceptions people have about Captain America is that he's got superpowers. It makes sense, seeing what he's capable of doing, but the whole point of the Super Soldier Serum wasn't to turn a regular man into someone with superpowers. The Super Soldier Serum unlocked a human's full potential, which means that Steve Rogers' abilities are the result of what a human being's body would be capable of at full potential. His stamina, strength, reflexes, eyesight, and every other aspect of Rogers' anatomy is simply the best it can possibly be. He's faster, stronger, and more capable of doing anything than any other human being on the planet. His mind was even enhanced to peak performance, which is why he can think himself out of any situation he finds himself in as a master tactician. Number 2, he was created by Stan Lee. This one comes as a shocker to a lot of people, but in reality, Captain America wasn't created by Stan the Man Lee, but rather by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. It's a fair assumption to make, sure. Stan Lee had a hand in making some of Marvel's most iconic heroes after all, and actually got his break writing Captain America, but his work in that area was more to do with the Silver Age than back in the earliest days of Timely and Marvel Comics' golden period. The first appearance of Captain America came in Timely Comics' Captain America Comics #1, which was dated in March 1941. The character was actually created about a year earlier, but it took some time to make it to print. Lee began working at Timely in 1939, but he didn't create and write his first book until August of 1941, when he created the Destroyer for Mystic Comics #6. Lee did work on the third Captain America book by providing writing filler, but it was all Joe Simon and Jack Kirby when it comes to the men who created the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan. Years later, Lee would play an integral part in returning Captain America to Marvel Comics by making him into an Avenger, but that was decades after Cap's debut. Number 1, he was the first Avenger. When Marvel Studios brought Captain America into the Marvel Universe, the studio did so with his first film titled Captain America: The First Avenger. It's a great title and a very underrated movie, and it works well for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's not accurate when describing the character from the comics. Captain America may have gone on to lead the Avengers, but he wasn't a founding member, nor could he be called the first one. When Captain America debuted, the Avengers were a good 22 years off in the future. He fought against the Nazis and got himself frozen in ice, which meant he wasn't around for the team's formation. That doesn't mean he wasn't going to show up sooner or later though. In the Avengers #4, Prince Namor was fleeing the team when he came across a frozen man in ice who happened to be the man he fought beside during World War II. Though he didn't recognize him at first, he threw him into the water in a fit of rage, which led to his thawing out. From that point forward, Captain America assumed the role of the team leader, and he's pretty much retained that position since that time. Was he the first Avenger? No, not by a long shot, but he was the man who kept the team from falling apart by making it into a viable organization centered around his leadership.